All right, we've got Antonio Sánchez in the house and David Frangioni. How's it going, my friends?
It's going well. Good to
Great.
be with you, Eugene. Good to see you, David.
Yes, you too, Antonio. Great to see you, Gene. Hello, everybody.
We've got some feedback. Hold on, I'm trying to fix this again. Apologize for that.
Live television.
It is. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Oh my God, man, it's awesome to have you back. David, you always bring me the best drummers, whether it's Nick Virgilio or it's Gavin Harrison or now Antonio Sánchez. I love the fact that you start from the top. You bring us the best drummers of today from your magazine, Modern Drummer. Antonio, it's awesome to have you here again. You were on my channel before COVID, and I don't remember if it was 3 or 4 years ago. And you've been busy, man. You've been doing a lot of stuff.
Well, I think we're all trying to keep ourselves busy, but the pandemic was an eye opener for everybody. In different ways. For people that were alone and single, it was hard because of that. For people that were married, it could have been hard too. That were people with children, people without children. The pandemic and the lockdown, it really was a wake up call for a lot of people and for musicians, especially since most of our livelihood comes from live gigs. Having
Yeah.
that completely obliterated, it was really really hard. But I try to keep myself busy, doing my album during the pandemic. I did a movie, that's what kind of kept me going. Otherwise, it would have been a depression fest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I looked up your biography recently, and I was really stunned to see that. I'm not surprised though because of your skill level, but I was stunned to see that you had 4 Grammys, and 2 of those are with Pat Metheny projects. I think you said it was with this actual tour.
Right.
Speaking of now, right? And I think this is the first album you were on with Pat Metheny. I remember I went with my best buddy Ryan and his stepdad, and we saw you because we've seen Pat Metheny many times in the past, and you were new. And I just remember us all being stunned watching you, especially during the drum solos. The fact that you're able to switch time signatures so fluidly was just baffling to us. And you took classic Pat Metheny songs and kind of added your own twist to it. What was it like doing the drum projects for those few albums you were with Pat, the whole Pat Metheny group, actually?
I mean, it was a little bit of a rocky start in the beginning because, it's a band that has so much history that, you know, I had to interpret all this really, older songs that were played and recorded by Danny Gottlieb and Paul Vertigo. And of course, they had been doing that for a long time. And then I came in and I had a completely different sound, different touch, different feel. And those tunes, I think they sounded very strange to Pat and the rest of the band in the beginning. And then little by little, they started getting used to me. And also, it was an adaptation period for me because in the beginning, I really wanted to please. I wanted to make sure that everything was comfortable for them. And I think I was playing more like I thought they wanted me to play than what I wanted to play. So in the beginning, it was a little, it's an adaptation period. And the record itself, when I hear it now, I love that record because the material is so beautiful, so melodic. But when I hear it, I don't hear myself that much. I hear parts of me, but then I also hear a lot of what I thought they wanted me to do. And they were very gracious in the studio, but they were also very very specific, which I always appreciate people that really know what they want. So that was a great record to do. I love that album. And then The Way Up was the second one we did with the Pat Metheny group, and that was in itself, that was an epic accomplishment, to do that album, which was just one continuous composition from beginning to end. Of course, we didn't record it like that. We recorded in pieces. But then when we had to go and tour it, then we did the whole thing from beginning to end, of course. And then Pat would introduce the band, just take 2 minutes in between, and then we would play for another hour and a half. So those concerts used to be like 3 hours 15, 3 hours 30.
Yeah.
and it was a lot.
You got your money's worth when you went to a Pat Metheny
Oh,
concert, and I remember I think The Way Up was probably the most ambitious jazz album of our time. I mean, there was so much intricacies with all the different instruments from everyone contributing to that. I mean, they had an excellent saxophone player. Of course, Lyle Mays, I felt very
trumpet
bad.
player. Trumpet player was
Trumpet,
Kung.
I'm sorry, trumpet, yeah. I felt very sad about Lyle Mays passing, and I know you worked with him. I mean, a lot of people don't realize not only are you a phenomenal drummer, but you're actually a pianist. I mean, didn't you go to school to learn piano before you were even doing drums?
No, I mean, I started playing
You
drums
both.
when I was 5, so that was definitely my first instrument. But then I saw the movie Amadeus by Milos Forman in the '80s, and it just really did something to me, to see a kid that was so talented and was composing symphonies and operas by the time he was 10. It really impressed me, and I wanted to learn to do some of that, and I got myself into the conservatory, and my major was classical piano and composition. So yeah, I was very lucky to be able to tour and get to know Lyle. He was really just an extraordinary musician, of course, but extraordinary mind.
Yeah.
He was kind of like a genius. It was his IQ level was of the charts, and on the tour bus he would do like quantum physics for
I didn't know that.
and he would do code for fun. You remember that game Asteroids from the
Mhm.
Atari? So he did a version of that, and the asteroids, when you would hit them, it would turn into my face. So then I would be shooting my own face with the little ship. So yeah, he was just an incredible character, and we also had a really cool and intense rivalry playing shooting pool. That,
Oh,
that that was our thing on the road. We would go and shoot pool along with Steve Rodby and Kung Fu and whoever wanted to go. But I used to beat him in the beginning sometimes because I used to have a pool table in Mexico, and he got pissed and he started practicing, and he ended up going to the nationals after that.
oh, I didn't
He
know that.
yeah, he became really really good actually. Yeah.
That's incredible. I mean, when you think about it, music is a lot of math. I mean, in order for you to keep the kind of time signatures that you come up with when you compose, I'd imagine you're pretty good at math, right? I mean, you're
I
good with
suck at math. I
really.
always tell musicians, you only need to count up to like 16 or something like that, and then everything is like a multiple of something.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not that hard. It's a matter to me. Those kinds of things is just more a matter of feeling them. I don't like counting so much. For me, it's all about internalizing something so that you can really play it. Otherwise, it's going to sound very mathematical, and I don't like
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
Did you do a lot of improv when you were playing with Metheny during the Way Up and Speaking of Now, or did you play it more towards the style that was on the record?
No, you know something happens when you do a tour where you're playing every day the same music in a different place in front of a bunch of different people. The music kind of takes a life of its own, and usually what happens in a tune like that, or sorry, in a piece like that, or in a tour like that, is that I start coming up with stuff that speaks to me. For example, if there's a specific drum fill that I have to do, a specific point, and it's a very poignant and important drum fill that is going to take the tune from one section to another. I mean, I'll try a million different things, and a lot of times I'll settle on something because I'm a jazz musician, but I'm a rock drummer also at heart. So,
Mhm.
for example, I was such a big fan of Neil Peart and the way he would compose parts, and he would play everything exactly the same every night. And there were very challenging parts, so it was an heroic feat every time he would play the whole thing right, and you could see people air drumming to his parts on
Mhm.
on every gig that they would do. So I like to be kind of like an in between those two worlds. I like to really improvise and then have some things that I like to deliver the same way every night just for the sake of consistency. And as a jazz musician, sometimes you want to change that drum fill every single night. But I really feel like there's the perfect drum fill for that specific point. So
Yeah,
once I feel like I find it, I have no problem doing the same thing over and over again and delivering it the right way. And
I
and
got you.
that I think is more like the rock drummer, the classical musician in me, more than the jazz musician.
Excellent. I'm kind of curious, David, how did you get to know Antonio? Because I didn't even know you knew Antonio, and we just started casually talking about it one day. And you recently gave him an award on the Modern Drummer. He was on the Modern Drummer cover story, "The Time to Lead Is Now." David, why don't you kind of give us a rundown of your introduction to Antonio and what led to this being a cover on your magazine?
Well, a couple of things. Thank you, Gene. First, tomorrow you mentioned Neil Peart. Tomorrow is the 3rd anniversary of Neil's passing, January
Wow,
7th. Passed
that's
away
correct.
January 7th, 2020. Modern Drummer did a festival honoring him that's actually still available online on moderndrummer.com. It's absolutely incredible. In September of 2020, on Neil's birthday, we launched that tribute to Neil. Antonio, an iconic drummer and one of the greats, absolutely in the same sentence as Neil and other icons. He is the cover story of December Modern Drummer 2022, and it's the highest honor that any drummer can achieve. And in recognition and congratulations, Antonio.
Thank you.
Again, it's so well deserved. I'm not sure Antonio even knows what I'm about to say because our history is so ensconced in the modern drummer world. But do you remember the Pat Metheny Group record at Right Track in 2001 that was done in Pro Tools with Rob Eaton?
That's right. Speaking of that, that's the one Gene has his shirt off.
And
Yep.
that is the first time I had the honor of working with Pat Metheny Group because I was the guy that put together the whole Pro Tools rig with
Oh,
Steve
no
Rodby.
way. Oh my
Yes,
Oh,
God.
wow.
way, with Steve Rodby, and then end up working with the whole band with Pat, with Lyle, because I'm a MIDI programmer, among other things.
Oh my
And
God.
I got, it was before the record that I was brought in, right? It was like a year before when everything was being planned and, envisioned. And I want to say David Oakes. I think my memory, you got to remember this is 2000,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it was Rob Eden. He was the
Well, Rob
engineer.
Eaton was the engineer, and I had
Yeah.
worked with Rob all through the 90s on a lot of projects. And remember, Rob, as a side note, had that Grateful Dead cover band thing that he used to do, and he was just a great
Yeah.
musician himself. But
Dark Star Orchestra.
yeah, and he's a great engineer, as we all know. So we worked together for a while, and he actually came in and he introduced me to Steve initially for Pat because Steve was handling all of the details of that. And that's when I started working with the Pat Metheny Group. And I'll never forget, this is, of course, long before I owned Modern Drummer. But I'll never forget talking to Steve, and we were geeking out on all the technology and the projects and what we were going to do for Pat and the next record. And, it's just a million things. Steve, of course, was in Chicago, and I was, and he was, as we got to know each other beyond just the collaboration of work, he realized, oh, you play the drums, you love drums. And, I studied with Joe Morello and Alan Dawson and Louis Bellson and went to National Conservatory. And Steve was like, oh my God, like, this is awesome. And he said, wait until you hear one of who will become one of the world's greatest drummers. And I said,
Wow.
Steve, that is quite a setup. I mean, who? And here we are. And 22 years later, I never forgot that, how he turned me on to your playing and what I was about to experience on that record. And now I look back, Antonio, and just the work that you've done, the contributions you've made, just Birdman alone. If we just take that one record, right? I mean, the Pat Metheny stuff is so iconic, and you can't just take one thing because cumulatively you've contributed so much iconic, groundbreaking playing and inspired so many millions of musicians. But just Birdman, just Pat Metheny, just your new record. You know, I mean, you have
Yeah, Pat Ombre too.
Dave Matthews playing on the same track, and it's just absolutely awesome. And so, congratulations, Modern Drummer. The entire Modern Drummer community is so so excited and inspired to continuously follow your career and your playing and learn from it, and just watch your career just evolve to iconic heights.
Oh, thank you, David. And it's really, such an honor to be on the cover. It's my third cover, which, looking back, it's really, such a dream. I remember the first Modern Drummer issue that I owned, that I ever saw in Mexico, was the one with Alex Acuna on the cover. This must have been sometime in the maybe early 90s or late 80s, something like that. And I remember just pouring through, and there were a lot of drummers that because this is before the internet, of course. So there were a lot of drummers that I had never heard about, and I would see all the Siljan ads and Yamaha ads, and I was like, who are these people? And then little by little, I would start finding out who they were. And I always dreamt of being one day in the magazine, not even in the cover, just just a little something in there about me. And that's how it started. There were a couple of little articles about me, and then when I heard the rumor that I might be put on the cover right after The Way Up, I just could not believe it. Modern Drummer has been such a pillar of the drumming community worldwide, and it's just such an honor to be there for the third time. So
and I'll link up Modern Drummer in the YouTube description for anyone that wants to see the videos on your YouTube channel as well, David.
Great. Well, awesome. Yeah, I mean, it is 47 years old now. It's the longest standing drum community, and it is worldwide, and it is something that is really important to the drumming community. But making the cover 3 times, yeah, that's absolutely incredible. It's very, very rarefied territory, but it's well deserved. Antonio, you're continuously pushing the envelope. I know so many of the listeners out there right now, the viewers are well familiar with your body of work and your playing, but I want to just encourage anybody that wants to learn more or really get up to speed on what Antonio's doing. Just go to Spotify and listen to the breadth of work that you've done, and hear that, yes, you can thread together the fact that there's a very defined playing style to your drumming and composing, but there's so much variety as well because you keep pushing the envelope. And I know, Gene, you're going to talk about Birdman. That's a must talk about, right? It's the first time I ever heard that soundtrack. I remember that after it came out, and even it was only 2014, right? So it wasn't that long ago, but so much has changed on the internet, how fast we can get access. At the time, it was really still a world of, you went to the theater and you had to kind of go there for a while before anything would come to the home. So I remember it was only in the theater a few days, and my phone was blowing up from all my drummer friends going, "You're not going to believe, have you seen Birdman? You are not going to believe this." Like, the soundtrack is drumming and it's absolutely off the charts. I'm like, what, huh? People are trying to explain it. We all went to the theater, and to this day, it's just so inspiring, and there's so much to take from it, because when I hear your drumming and then I try to play the parts, what ends up happening is just trying to learn the parts, it changes my whole approach, and you can never sound like any other drummer, but just by getting close, you start to implement some of those musical ideas and things that change and kind of shift your playing. And I think that's what's just so awesome about trying to apply that approach of it's virtuosic at every level, but it's so musical, and it's got so many melodies and other elements to it that are far beyond just the rhythm of what traditional drumming consists of. That's really what it's all about. And before I forget, I meant to ask you, are you playing a Phoenix kit from Yamaha, or which kit are you playing with Yamaha?
Yeah. I have a Phoenix, and here in my home studio, I have a Phoenix with my tech Chris Castillo in New York that I take everywhere. And at Birdman, it was I loved that kit so much that I was like, I have to get one of those, and the same color. It's like a fade green, which I call now the Green Monster. And funny story, I got it finally from Yamaha, and we were in the rehearsal space with Metheny doing. We had just recorded Kin with the Pat Metheny Unity Group, and we're about to go on tour, and we were rehearsing at SIR in New York, and I was rehearsing with my always faithful Maple Custom Absolute Nouveau, which always sounded great. That's what I recorded the way up with. It was an awesome kit. And then while we were recording, they brought in the Phoenix. It finally arrived in the boxes. I set it up. We started playing, and we were playing with in-ear monitors. So I wasn't really listening to the room that much. Everything was just right here. But I was playing exactly the same, just with a different kit. But Pat didn't have in-ears, and we started playing exactly the same tune that I was playing with the other kit. So we finish, and then he looks at me and he's like, "You got to be careful with that thing. That thing is so loud." I'm like, "Wow, really? I didn't even notice." So yeah, I mean, it's just an incredible piece of gear, and it has so much projection that's why I love using it in the studio and live.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
one of the things that really draws me to your style of drumming is the fact that there's a lot of drummers out there that have incredible speed. They're really good with stick work, but some of them lack groove. Some of them aren't good timekeepers. And the way you just go in and out of different time signatures, I don't know how you do it. Like, it gives me a headache even thinking about it. You do a lot of polyrhythms. I mean, is that just something that you were born with, that ability to understand intuitively how to switch between time signatures, or is it just a lot of practice when you were growing up? Did you slam those drums 8 to 10 hours a day? How did you develop that kind of style?
I mean, I was always playing. I mean, when I was in Mexico and I finally had my little drum room, I was always playing. I mean, I think I have some natural ability for sure, but it was just I loved just being on the drums, just doing different things. And I used to improvise a lot before I knew that that was kind of jazz. I
Mhm.
was just a rock drummer, but I would just like do my little improvs and record them and then listen back. So I started really liking music that had those elements. Like, for example, my gateway into jazz was the Chick Corea Electric Band with the great Dave Weckl, of course, on drums. So I started getting really interested in complex music, and I would be curious about different odd time signatures and that kind of stuff. But I always had the mission of trying to make it as musical as possible, and I think there was a good feedback loop between the piano, my classical studies, and the drumming. Of course, in the beginning I couldn't see the connection. I would think, okay, rock is rock, jazz is jazz, classical is classical, and much later I started kind of threading the needle between everything and being like, okay, it's all motivic development. It all has dynamics. It all has melodies. It all has form, structure. So I started understanding a lot of things about how just music in general works. Good music. What are the elements that makes us, you know, like a Beatles song or like a Mozart tune or like a Coltrane solo? It's the same. It's the same things usually. It's a lot of motivic development, repetition, leaving space, dynamics. That's what kind of ends up moving us. It's storytelling in essence. And I've always been very adamant about trying to tell stories when I'm playing, when I'm composing. And of course, Pat Metheny, Chick Corea, Michael Brecker, those guys that I was very lucky to play with. They're masters at that, and that was the best school I could ever have gone to. Playing with these incredible musicians and being on tour with them and playing their music and talking about their music. It has been a gift. When I think about me coming from Mexico and just I was so far away from all this, like I was saying before. Modern drummer was like in a pedestal, and it still is. But to have moved over here and to have been able to get in the scene and play with a lot of the people that I wanted to play with, it's been a trip and a half, and it's been an honor.
Now, Antonio, when you heard Chick Corea Electric Band, I'm presuming it started with the first record, Got a Match, and all those, Rumble and all that. Were you already implementing electronics into your setup, or was that kind of one of the first times, because Dave was so innovative at that time with Chick in triggering sounds and whatever, the cutting edge technology at that time? I know Pat was an early Synclav user, like Chick was, and Chick had a Fairlight, and Dave had a Simmons and all these other things. When did you discover it, and how?
Well, no, I was totally an analog kid. I had no intention, no idea about electronics, nothing. I had a little synth it was called a Bit 99 by Krumar. I think it was like a really old little synth, and I was fascinated with it. But in terms of drums, that the electronics and all that stuff, it came way, way, way later. But yeah, it was light years. It was that record.
Oh, okay. The second one.
Yeah, and that's the one a friend of mine gave me. He told me, if you like rock, you might dig this. And I started hearing it. It had a lot of the elements that I liked from rock, but of course, they were improvising and playing all this incredible stuff, and it just kind of blew my mind. And that's what I decided I wanted to go into that direction and just kind of learn more, because I had been playing along to the Police, Rush, Led Zeppelin. Those were the bands that I really liked, which of course, John Bonham, Stuart Copeland, and Neil Peart are gods, of course. But once I started getting into fusion, then obviously it started getting a lot more challenging, and I got into Dave, into Vinny, into Dennis Chambers,
Billy,
Billy, of course, Steve Gadd, those guys. I started discovering a lot more. Peter Erskine, all
Bill
these
Stewart.
incredible drummers that I started listening to, that opened my eyes in a very different way. But because I had the rock thing going on, and then I had the Latin thing going on, and then I started wanting to have the jazz thing and the fusion thing going on. Then I started kind of making an interesting composite, I guess, of different styles that I could apply into this new kind of music that I was trying to play. So yeah, I mean, I was just lucky to be in New York in the beginning, when Latin jazz was really kind of really interesting, and there were not that many drummers that could play really good Latin and really good jazz at that moment. It was either or, usually. Maybe it was three or four that could really do it, and I was able to be in in Paquito de Rivera's band, Danilo Perez band, David Sanchez, people that were making really, really interesting music at the time. And then thanks to that, I got discovered by Pat, because I was playing this, kind of, like a composite of all these different styles. And I was doing crazy independence thing with the clav and the left foot, which, of course, El Negro Hernandez was a big influence on that. But then I had this other stuff going on, and I think that's what Pat kind of got interested in.
Well, I want to talk to you about Bad Ombre too. I mean, that's Dave. You listened to that whole album, I'm assuming, right, from start to finish?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Just want to show you a quick picture. This is my reference system, and then this is with your album pulled up with a red screen on it. And I sat there probably a couple of months ago. I discovered that album because we were talking, and I'm like, holy cow, there's so much diversity of music style in this, and so many featured artists. And I want to go over some notes that I took, and then maybe you talk about whether I'm on the right track or not. First of all, I want to give you a huge props for the song Ehe 2.0 that has Dave Matthews and Pat Metheny on the same track. That's something I never would have imagined as a collab, and it just works. It just works.
Yeah, I think so too. It took me a little, a little effort to convince Pat to do it, because he's very selective about what he does. But I think one of the things that interested him was that I told him, I would love for you to do something where nobody can recognize you, like that nobody would know that it's you if they heard it. And I think that kind of went like, oh, that sounds like a good challenge, because he has such a specific style and
Yeah.
sound. He's so one of the most recognizable guitar players, on the planet. So I think that was kind of like a challenge for him. So the record came about because I was in Mexico, and before the pandemic, and I went to the concert of a good friend of mine who is on the record. It's an incredible musician, singer, Silvana Estrada, and she just won Best New Artist on the Latin Grammys. I mean, she's exploding. And I went to her gig, and it was with a band. It was great. And then she did a solo thing with her quattro guitar, a cappella, just with a guitar. And it was this beautiful, haunting song in 5/4 called El Agua y la Miel. And it was about the disappearance of women in Mexico. And I heard that, and I was just getting chills when she was singing it, and I started hearing all these bass lines and drums on top of it. And at the end of the gig, I asked her if she could record the song for me, just the her voice and the quattro guitar separately, and a click, and if she could give me the permission of just messing around with it and see what I could come up with. So she sent it a couple of weeks later. I got to work, and I removed her guitar in some parts, and I made it really epic. I reharmed some of the parts. I played everything, synths, basses, a bunch of drums. I started layering things, and I sent it to her, and she was blown away, because she told me, I never thought my tune could do this. It was not designed to do this, but I love it. So she was very surprised. And then a bulb went off in my head, and I was like, I think I want to do the whole record like that. So the next challenge was to see what kind of singers I could ask, because I didn't want it to be a jazz record. I wanted to go a little bit back to my roots of rock and roll and really well produced music. For example, I'm a huge fan of like "So" by Peter Gabriel, or "Sowing the Seeds of Love" by Tears for Fears. Albums that have insane production value that you can listen to over and over again, and you keep discovering new things. But one of the things that I realized that all these bands and all these albums have in common is that they have layers and layers of keyboards, voices, guitars, you name it. But drums, there's usually one drum part. Sometimes there's percussion, but there's usually the one drum part. You don't hear 10 drum parts in the same song. So I started thinking, why can't I use the drums as a production tool the same way you would with keyboards, or with voices, or with guitars? And I started layering a bunch of different drum kits with different sounds, different compression, different reverb, panning them in different ways, and so that you could kind of feel like a monster drum set going on. And then I would triple, quadruple, quintuple the same drum parts with different sounds. And there's always a little bit of rubbing, obviously, when you play the same drum parts. But I started realizing that it just sounded like a monstrous kit, and you don't really know why, but I really dug that effect. So I just started going with that. And the second person I asked for a tune was Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails, and of course, amazing film scores that he does as well. And my pitch to the artist was, I'm working on this, and it could be something new, something old that you have laying around. It could be a sketch. I could work with anything, basically. I just need your voice, a click track, any kind of reference that you want to give me is fine, and your permission, your blessing to completely, let me reinvent the song in my own way. And I was very surprised that Trent was like, well, actually, let me do something new for you. He recorded this new track, sent it to me, and this was during the pandemic. So the advantage was a lot of people were at home without doing anything,
Mm.
and they just kind of had the time to do this kind of project. So one after the other. Then once I had Trent, then it was easy for me to go to other artists like Dave Matthews, and like, Trent did this. Would you mind giving me a song? And it just was like a domino effect after that. So it's been one of the most rewarding projects I've ever done, because I'm really like producing, and this is a producer's dream, because I had all this raw material from these incredible singers that gave me permission to do whatever I wanted with their
Mm.
songs. And for example, when I was working on Dave Matthews' song, if you've heard the original song, which came out in the beginning of the 2000s, it's a very linear song in 4/4. It's so groovy, it's beautiful, it's killing. But of course, I'm a little crazy in the head, rhythmically speaking. So I started chopping it up, and I did some parts in 7, some parts in 9, some parts in 6/8. And at one point, I was like, man, am I overdoing this? And when I send it to him, is he going to think that I just did this crazy, horrible plastic surgery on his baby, because his song is like a baby. So I started getting a little nervous, but I thought it flowed enough. And then I had those bars in the middle where I asked Pat Metheny to do a solo. And the thing about this project is that it was not a collaborative effort, in the sense that I would do a little bit and then I send it to the artist for approval and then keep working on it. I would completely finish the song, mix it, and send it. So in the case of Dave Matthews, I sent it to him and I didn't hear back for like 2 weeks. So I started getting really nervous, and I was just thinking that he heard it and he hated it. And I was just kind of bracing for the worst. And then one day he just called me and he said, "Man, I finally listened to the song. I love it. As a matter of fact, I think you wrote so much music on it that you should have writer's credit." And he
Wow.
gave me a percentage of the writing. So yeah, it's been an incredible project. That I wanted to have, of course, men, women, and Latin American artists as well. So I
Awesome.
had Lila Downs, great hip hop uh, musician from Chile, Ana Tiju, Silvana Estrada, Maro from Portugal, Tana Alexa, which is my wife. That
Your
was the
wife, yeah.
most collaborative effort on Trapped. Becca Stevens, Rodrigo y Gabriela was the only instrumental track.
That's an
which are
awesome track. Yeah, I really love
great,
that one.
great guitar duo from Mexico. Who am I missing? Michelle and Degocello, of course. Kimbra. It's just the record is all over the place, because the artists that I got are so different from one another. But what I wanted to try to do was to draw a straight line through all the music, with the drumming, with the production, and the storytelling is very important for me. So I knew
Yeah.
that all these incredible singer songwriters had great stories that are important, that talk about things that are important to me, like social justice, prison reform, women's issues, all these things that I think is very depression, anxiety, all these things that I think is very important to talk about.
Well, I apologize. My mic kept cutting out before. That's why you kept seeing me go in and out. I missed the part about 9 Inch Nails. Was it the song? Because I actually took notes. I think we're past that now. It sounded very 9 Inch Nails to me. Is that the song you were referring to?
Exactly. That's Trent.
That's awesome. That's exactly what I wrote down. And then the other track that I felt was very strongly influenced was Comet Come to Me. It sounds just like Stuart Copeland. I mean, I feel like you took some vibes from his playing and you
Absolutely.
implemented.
I even put a bunch of delay on my snare, because I know he used to do that. And I didn't do it because I knew he did it, but I think I was indirectly completely influenced by what he used to do on Senyata Mondata, for example.
Hmm.
He used to do that all the time. And it sounded so good. Or on Walking on the Moon,
Yeah.
all this stuff, and it had tons of delay on it. And I always wonder, when I was listening to it back in Mexico a long time ago, I was like, how is he doing that? That sounds not human. And then later I saw him live, and I was like, oh shit, that's a bunch of delay. So yeah, I used some of those tricks in the production.
That's
That's
awesome.
Michelle and Negocello's song, by the way.
Yeah. Well, you know, one thing, there was another couple of songs. I think it was Doyeni. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Doyen and M Power. David, you would appreciate this because you are a big progressive rock fan. You loved ELP, of course. I felt like those two songs had some Carnival 9 kind of sounds in the background towards the end with those keyboard sound effects. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
No,
even know if you're aware of that, Antonio, or not,
yeah.
but it gave me Carnival 9 vibes.
Emerson,
Carnival 9.
Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. It has that Moog.
They're you know, that kind of back and forth.
Yeah, a little sequencer sounding part, although I think he was playing it. But yeah, it's there's, you know, Gene, there's so many different elements, you know, to the different songs, and yet what's to me what's really awesome about it is that it's not just it's a drummer's album, but it's got all the drumistic, you know, playing that you could hope for, you know, because as drummers, you know, one of the things we naturally gravitate to, especially on a drummer's solo album, is, you know, oh, what are all the amazing drum parts that we can learn and you know, be inspired by. But it's so much more than that. And it kind of reminded me in a way, even though stylistically it didn't, but like impact wise it did, of when I would listen to early Tony Williams solo albums. Like I never knew what I was really going to get, but I loved every bit of it. And song to song, it wasn't just, you know, another version of a similar kind of thing, which a lot of fusion albums or you know, progressive jazz albums can be. There's so much variety, but yet it's cohesive. It's all Antonio Sánchez. There's no question who's playing it. There's no question who's composing it. And that's what I think the brilliance of the album is. And you do that consistently, Antonio. You have your sound and your approach, and yet it's not just within one style.
Oh, thank you, David. I appreciate that. I mean, and to me, that's I think that's why I call this very, very different artists. I mean, to call Trent Reznor, to call, you know, Ana Tijoux from Chile, who does hip hop, you know, and then to call Rodrigo and Gabriela, which they do like you know, they do like rumba flamenca instrumental.
Great covers. They do great covers.
Yeah, and you know, I knew it was going to be a big challenge to put all this music together and try to make it sound cohesive. But you know, I kind of thrive on that. I really like that stuff, to like sit, you know, and be like, okay, how the hell am I going to do this? You know, and it's daunting in the beginning, and then once I start kind of getting a flow, it's just very rewarding thing to start hearing how it's taking shape, you know, in real time, because I did everything. I did all the recording, I did all the editing. I used no engineer except for myself. So, you know, I could see it grow in real time, you know, and
you mixed it? You were
Yeah,
the
yeah.
mixing engineer too?
Yeah, I have a mixing engineer that helped me put the final touches, but yeah, I mixed like 90% of it.
Do you use Pro Tools to as your workstation? Okay.
Yeah.
So Antonio, I have to plug because we're an audio channel. I listened to your album Bad Ombre 2. I listened to it in 2-channel at first, but then I upmixed it with the Dolby Surround upmixer in my Atmos system. I have a 9.4.6 speaker layout, as you saw. And there's so much good decorrelated information in those tracks that it actually sounds discrete from the sides and the back channels, and you actually get a good fill above you. And this is just taking a 2-channel recording and upmixing it. You've got David Frangioni on here who does spatial audio production. I think you guys need to be talking about this is the ideal album for spatial audio. I don't know if you're aware of spatial audio or not.
Yeah, and actually it was floated, you know, to do a mix, but I realized that we would have to do a brand new mix for everything, and we were already behind. We pushed the release of this album 4 times because of the pandemic, and we just couldn't hold it any longer. But yes, if there was a candidate for Atmos, this would be the album for sure. Yeah.
Well, and all the Atmos mixes that I do come from Pro Tools sessions that are now the new multi-tracks, right?
Mm.
And then, from there we do an immersive audio mix from the original mix. So
Wow.
it's not completely from scratch. But yeah, this album would be absolutely awesome in that.
Well, I would encourage anyone that's anybody that's into your music. I would encourage them to throw it through an up mixer. It's quite a treat. I even did it with your other album. You have more of a traditional jazz album called Only Now, and in that album, I wanted to keep everything the soundstage more forward because it's more traditional jazz, and that's when I used the Audiomatic up mixer, and I really enjoyed that. And I wanted to ask you about that because what do you feel like? Today's audience is much different in music listening than they were 2 decades ago, right? I feel like people have more ADD. They don't really focus as much unless there's a lot of flashy sounds.
Don't get me started, man.
I mean, you've got pop artists. I love music like The Weeknd and Ariana Grande, but obviously that's more digestible kind of content. What do you think about making an album like the one I was talking about, the Only Now? I mean, do you think it's a different audience today than it was 20 years ago? Or do you think there's enough of an audience to appreciate the musicality and the traditional kind of jazz vibe that album throws?
I mean, I think there's enough of a jazz audience that appreciate those kinds of things. But yeah, it's getting harder and harder, to get people to just pay attention to things. I mean, because I see it on myself. It's harder for me also to pay attention to things because everything's so fragmented.
Because of this.
Exactly.
It's because of this. Dumbing us down.
It's a blessing and a curse. It's just something that is calling for our attention all the time. And I started realizing that the only way I could get some work done is if I leave my phone in another floor of the house.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have access to it as easily. And that started kind of changing, how much work I would get done. Because if I have it around me, it's just automatic that I just go to it. So yeah, I mean, things have changed quite a bit. And in jazz, I have to say it has changed for the worse as well.
Yeah.
As everything, I think there's like a very obvious stupidification of society, of media, of what people consume. I mean, I go on TikTok for a second and I feel my neurons just rotting, in time. It's just so much crap out there that is just like bolts of dopamine,
Yeah.
and it's just so blatant, and people spend hours and hours making these videos, and in the hopes that they will go viral. I'm guessing, and unfortunately for a lot of musicians that do creative music, a gimmick has become indispensable.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of good musicians out there that they feel like they need to dress like clowns and do all this fancy stuff to get people's attention. And maybe they're right. Maybe that's what you need to do nowadays. But unfortunately, it seems like a lot of people are concentrating more on that than on just making really deep music. I feel like the music has gotten more shallow, and everything around it has gotten louder. The costumes, and how you present it, and the choreography that you're going to do, and the faces you do when you're looking at the camera. All that stuff seems more important than the matter of the music itself nowadays. And to me, that's disappointing. And that used to be a natural filter for jazz. If you play, you play. If you don't play, you don't play. And if you want to be a jazz musician, you have to play. Nowadays, I feel like there's kind of mediocre level musicians that have gotten really big because they're big on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok. And they have a thing and they have a look, and now they're getting booked on the main stages of some jazz festivals. Like I won't mention names, but I've been to a couple of festivals lately where on the main stage there are people that I don't know who they are. I didn't know, and I had to look them up. I mean, I've been playing jazz for the better part of my life, And for me not to know who's playing on the main stage of a jazz festival, that's crazy, you know. And then I looked them up, and I was like, oh, it's because they have 500,000 followers on YouTube, you know. And then it rewards the wrong thing, you know. The music industry is rewarding the wrong things, and is giving the wrong uh yeah what it's just giving the wrong idea to the musicians. Okay, what do I need to do in order to be successful? You know, the motivations are different now. And I feel like then the problem is that the music suffers, the depth of the music suffers.
Yeah.
And it's a sad state of affairs. But I've been doing a lot of talks lately where I talk about counterculture, you know, doing things right, doing things well, doing things with depth, and putting all your heart and soul into something that really is meant to do something deep. Yeah, I think that's kind of a counterculture right now, because mediocrity is just so um ubiquitous everywhere right now. And I think, you know, that old saying, virtue is its own reward, it's kind of true. You know, when you do things the right way, you know, I think it rewards you spiritually and emotionally in a very different way. And you know, this is just my point of view, but I think a lot of the motivations that musicians have nowadays are just misplaced, unfortunately.
Well, the one thing I love about real jazz, I'm not talking about the bubblegum stuff that, you know, from the 80s and stuff that got really watered down. Real jazz, you can't fake it, right? If you are going to play straight up jazz, like George Benson style, old George Benson style, or Wes Montgomery, or Pat Metheny, or John Schofield, you can't fake it. You have to be you have to be an A-lister kind of musician to play that level of complexity and to make it sound easy. You know, like Miles Davis said, the music is the space between the notes. So that's the one thing I like about that category of music, is you generally don't get bad musicians when you listen to that kind of style.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, I've in these festivals that I've played in lately, that you know, there's always, you know, really good musicians, but I've noticed that a lot of these new bands and new musicians just have no nuance. It's all in your face, you know. It's like really, really loud and hard, and you know, people wearing wigs. You know, I'm like, okay, that's all good, but where's the nuance? You know, I mean, George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic. You know, it was just so funky, and it was a whole thing, and it was crazy, and it was um very visual too. But the depth of the music you couldn't question. You know, Sun Ra, you know, same thing. But I feel like nowadays there's unfortunately a lot of artists that are, you know, thinking gimmick first, music second,
Yeah.
and to me that's a big mistake, I think.
Yeah, it's a good perspective, man. I definitely agree with you on a lot of this. And I'm always searching for cutting edge kind of music that I could promote on this channel. And anybody that watches this channel, even though we're home theater based, I'm always throwing music stuff on our YouTube community, because primarily that's why I got into Audioholics. Is I love music. I love fidelity above all else. I like movies too, but I would say 70% of the time I'm in my theater room, I'm listening to music.
Well, and that's another thing that I have to say about jazz. Sometimes the production value is just a little lacking to me, and that's
Hmm.
why I have embarked on this kind of complex projects lately. Because of course I was very influenced by Pat Metheny and his quest for making really good sounding records. You know, a lot of jazz records, you get in the studio, you record it in 1 or 2 days, you mix it in
Yeah.
1 day, you master it in 1 day, and it sounds like that. You know, and sometimes it's fine when the music calls for that. It can be great, but I feel like you know, musicians that play jazz can learn a lot from musicians that do rock or pop and big productions, and the other way around too. You know, and to me, I'm kind of trying to bridge both worlds, where you know, there's a lot of improvisation, there's a lot of depth, but there's also a lot of production value. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And that quest has led me to taken me to some very interesting places, like this new album. And speaking about good sounding things and things that you can look at, I think speaking about The Way Up, that album with Pat Metheny that we did back in 2003, came out. The tour was 2005, but there's an incredible DVD of that
Yep.
that you can get now on Amazon Prime.
I think it's only DVD though. I don't think that's in Blu-ray. I know. No, The Way Up is in Blu-ray, but speaking of now, I think is only in
Yes,
DVD.
I think you're right, but you can download The Way Up, the video we did in Korea, in Seoul, on Amazon Prime.
Yeah,
And that video is fantastic because
great.
that's, as a matter of fact, that's the first time I realized how badass everybody was in the band, because I never saw them playing because I was so concentrated on what I was doing that
Yeah,
I didn't realize, the incredible job that everybody was doing. Of course, I knew everybody was great, but to see it, and they did a great job of editing everything so that you can really
it's a great
see
concert.
the things that are important at that moment, which a lot of music videos lack. A lot of times the editing sucks. I mean, I remember seeing this video with it was Chick Corea and Vinny and Wecco were at the very end of the video trading on this tune, and they were trading like eights or something like that, and they would show everybody counting, and they would barely show Vinny and Dave playing. And I wanted to shoot myself and to shoot whoever edited that video, because it was like, oh my God, can they understand that whoever the drummers are the ones that are the stars right now? So that's the good thing about that Way Up video. That is
Great
really
video.
edited. Yeah.
Was that the last collaboration that you did with Pat Metheny with Lyle Mays? Because I don't know if you were on anything else. Yeah,
That was the last one. That was the last one he ever did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we did another tour in 2010. That was the last tour we did with Lyle. It was just a quartet tour in Europe in the summer, and unfortunately, I didn't even know that. After that, that's when he already started having problems with his cancer, in the mouth, which was just very, very sad. But
That is,
you know,
yeah.
it was- yeah.
So David, you would appreciate this. I actually used The Way Up when I calibrate a system. There's something unique on that disc that was, I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but all of the bass for that disc goes to the subwoofer channel. So if you don't have the LFE set up and you don't have the subwoofer channel set up, even if you have your main speaker set full range, you get almost no bass. So there's a lot of times where I set up systems where I don't use an LFE channel if it's a full range tower. And if you can't route the LFE to those towers, there's no bass. And I always use that disc to make sure that the bass is being routed properly to the speakers.
The DVD.
The Blu-ray.
Oh, the Blu-ray. Okay.
Yeah.
Blu-ray.
I think it's in DTS. It's DTS HD. I think it's DTS
DTS
HD.
5.1 DTS HD.
Yeah. Check it out if you get a chance.
Rob Eaton mixed that?
Yes, Rob Eden and Pat and Steve. I think they mixed it.
Awesome. So that was the group that I worked with. Yeah, I mean that was an amazing time. I worked with Chick in the late '80s as a huge fan of the Electric Band, then going on and working with him, and then getting the call from Steve Rodby and working with Pat for those years, early 2000s. Those were two of my absolute idols. And when you look back on not only the music side of it, but their music was so innovative that unless you kind of go a step further into it, you don't realize how cutting edge, as Antonio pointed out, the sound is itself. Chick had Bernie Kirsch, Pat Metheny had Rob Eaton, but they also not only had a very high level of sound reproduction and capture, but they had a very high level of technology, which, for the most part was my lane, along with the sound side of it. So really always, it's one thing to have the most cutting edge tech. It's another thing to push it to the limit where you're getting all of these sounds and all of these, these approaches to ideas, because tech is kind of a parallel lane of possibilities. On the one hand, it's what kind of sounds and what kind of things can you do with it. And then on the other hand, it's what kind of things can you use it for that would be absolutely impossible otherwise. And like, for example, like when we used the Synclav in the 80s for hard disk recording and flying things around, like there was no other solution. You had, it was before Fairlight MFX. Yeah, there was Waveframe. There was early days Diaxis, but for the most part, it was Synclav was kind of first. And there was everything else was linear open reel tape, analog or digital, didn't really matter. You had little sampling chunks you could move things around in, but we're talking about 16 tracks of actual nonlinear capability. So these two lanes that both Pat and Chick were highly innovative in, really went a long way towards where we are today. And it was really amazing, I can say, being a part of that. And having a front row seat to some of the greatest musicians in the world during those sessions, such as you, Antonio. That's a great honor.
No, and that's the thing, that these guys were pushing the envelope technology wise, but also, they were the best musicians on the planet, which, there's other musicians that have pushed the envelope technology wise, but they are just not at the same level as somebody like Pat or Chick. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, no, it's an incredible combination to hear, what the possibilities are, and as you said, Gene, when you listen, these discs become reference discs just because of the love and care and approach that's put into them.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly, and that's why people keep listening to them. 30 years later or whatever.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So that's. And they're still just as inspiring and just as musically, valid and awesome as you were. Like you said, they're timeless. Like when we're listening to Miles records, in a silent way, or some of these records, like they're going to be forever.
Bitches Brew.
They're prolific. Yeah,
or physical graffiti, or Regatta de Blanc. I mean, it's just every genre has like seminal records that. Will live on forever.
I like that you mentioned physical graffiti for Led Zeppelin. I always thought that was their best work.
Yeah,
they're a little more obscure.
Not as that and In Through the Outdoor. I think both they're different, because physical is like the best of all of like your classic Zeppelin. In Through the Outdoor, they really had taken it to another level. You hear a tightness in the band that you only get after 10, 11 years of playing like they had been at that point, like all the time.
Houses of the Holy. I mean, that record is also
yeah, it's huge sound, yet it's tight. It's not boomy, and it's not like over. The sonics aren't like overdone, like perfect, but it's massive. And the way they use room sounds. First time I ever heard Dire Maker, when Bonham does the snare, intro, and then the tom fill, and then that like kind of shuffle-esque kind of vibe that no drummer had ever really played a rock song like that before, and Bonham did that over and over, as you've said. But first time I ever heard that, I was just like, what?
And the production chops that Jimmy Page was experimenting with. I mean, it was just pretty incredible. The guitar overdubs and John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones was a beast too on the keyboards and the bass. It's so underrated. John Paul Jones, I think he should be looked at a much higher level than I think he is.
Without a doubt, when he got that CS80, all of those sounds that we started hearing on songs that were become soundtracks of our life in the rock lane. He just did things with it that we never heard before. The instrument didn't exist. And now it exists in the hands of someone like John Paul Jones. And as you say, he was a genius, innovator. The sounds, the playing, the production with Jimmy Page, like it was all so cutting edge. And the awesome thing is we can listen to it today. And Gene, in this world of Audioholics, where sound is such a priority to many of us, it still holds up as a sonically world-class album, especially the super deluxes where they went back in and they remastered. And you listen to it, and even today, there's so much to learn from. It's not old classic music at all. This is music that still holds up, and you can learn so much about production values and just hear all these cool parts. And every time you hear it, there's another little nuance that you capture, and the way that Jimmy used effects. Very, very innovative. I mean, Beatles obviously did a lot of that as well, but they had fewer tracks to work with, and obviously a completely different style of music, but just timeless.
Antonio, if you get a chance, you got to check out the Beatles in Atmos, like Abbey Road and Sgt. Pepper's. Like, I can't believe they could take recordings from that era and turn it into spatial audio, and it sounds tasteful. It's just,
as a matter of fact, I think one of the demo songs was "Here Comes the Sun" for Atmos, and I remember I heard it. I was like, oh, "Holy crap!"
Yeah.
Antonio, you'll appreciate this. I always say, especially when I'm like giving seminars or whatever, I always say because it'll be at a college or whatever, I'll say, "Thank God the Beatles did not have social media. We would have never gotten those 200 songs in basically 7 years." And at that level of innovation, every album takes it up another notch. I mean, we literally had 100 years of evolution in that period, just because of how far they kept taking it and taking it and taking it. And there was no album that was the same on technologically, musically, production wise, et cetera, yet they were all genius. And, but they, no distractions, to the point where that's why they stopped touring. Right. So the opposite of distracted, and look at what's possible when you have that level of focus. And
great point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why, I was saying that it's just kind of the stupidification of society and culture in general. And, it's just when you hear some of the biggest hits nowadays, sometimes I really kind of makes me feel old and out of place. I'm like, oh my God, this is really what people are digging nowadays. What's happening? And there's great stuff. There's always great stuff. If you know where to look. But the stuff that is, I feel like after the pandemic, the oxygen that was in the music industry, I feel like creative music was here and commercial music was here. And I feel like now it's like here.
Yeah.
It's just the oxygen all went up to the top, and the bottom just got compressed even more. And it was not easy before the pandemic for creative music. It was not easy to tour. It was not easy to put out albums. Now it's, man.
You could say the same thing about movies now. Nobody has original ideas anymore. They're making reboots after reboots of garbage. And they're just ruining iconic characters.
It must be really, really hard for a really, really good filmmaker or a director of cinematography to see their work go straight to Netflix. Where people will watch it in an iPad at best. It's kind of depressing. But I mean, same thing with us. We try so hard to make compelling music, and then people will hear it all compressed through their phone.
Dude, I've got an audio system in every room of this house. And even back here, I've got $16,000 speakers in my office. And my daughter wants to listen to music on her phone, not even with earbuds. She just literally puts it on and blasts it at volume 11 on her phone. I've given her wireless speakers, good quality speakers, and she listens on her phone.
Yeah, so, it's just a different time.
No idea what they're missing. Gene, before we let Antonio go, just very quickly on Birdman, how did you get the call, and where did the concept come from? You're going to basically do a drum soundtrack.
Well, it's an interesting story because when I was growing up in Mexico City, there was a really good music station on the radio, 96.9 WFM. And they used to play the hippest music around Mexico when I was a teenager. And one of the DJs was Alejandro González Iñárritu, the director of Birdman. So I discovered a lot of music thanks to him. And then they used to have a nightly show called Magic Nights, where they used to play slightly more, jazzier, more sophisticated music. And one day I'm listening to it, and this amazing song comes on. I was like, wow, what is this? And then a voice comes out at the end and says, this was The Last Train Home by the Pat Metheny Group. So the first time I heard the Pat Metheny Group was through Iñárritu, which is, pretty interesting. And then we were playing in Los Angeles in 2005, The Way Up, and Iñárritu came, and I didn't know he was there, and I met him afterwards, and he was very complimentary. He really loved what we did, and he told me, "Man, you looked like an octopus there when you did this solo." I mean, it kind of stayed in his head. And then we stayed in touch, but it was very casual. He would come to New York, and we would, we would meet up because he had a screening or something like that, and I would go with Pat because Pat is also a big fan of Iñárritu. And then one day I was in Miami with Tana, my wife, and her grandmother. We were coming out of a classical concert, and then my phone rang, and I saw on the caller ID it was Iñárritu, and I was like, "Wow, he never calls me." We email, but we never talk on the phone. So I answered, and he said, "I'm working on my next film. It's going to be a dark comedy, and I thought it would be really cool to do just a drum score. Would you be into it?" And I was like, "Man, of course, I'm there. Anything you want." And he said, "Okay, great. I'll send you the script, and we'll talk about it." And then I hung up the phone, and my elation turned into terror in 2 seconds, because I was like, "How the hell am I going to do this? Doing a drum score for a Hollywood movie. I've never done a film score before, so I was scared, but I was, I thought, he knows what he's doing. Obviously, he's a master, and I'm just gonna follow his lead." And he asked me then to do, well, actually, I got to New York, and they sent me actually the physical script, and I went through it, and it's a weird movie to begin with. So imagine what the script read like. So he told me it was a dark comedy, and I realized I got to the end of the script and I hadn't laughed once. So I got really worried. I was like, "Oh my God, what am I getting myself into?" But then I thought, he knows what he wants and he knows what he's doing. So just, follow his lead. Then he asked me for some demos, and I thought, well, maybe I'll send him like a demo for Michael Keaton, like a rhythmic motif that every time you see him, you're gonna hear it. And then another one for Ed Norton, but a cooler one because Ed Norton's kind of cooler in the movie. So I was kind of trying to come from that point of view of real themes, and then I sent them to Iñárritu, and 2 days later he wrote me back. It's like, "Man, your demos are beautiful, are great, but they're exactly the opposite of what I'm looking for." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is a really bad start." And then I asked him, "So, give me some advice. What?" And he said, "I just kind of really want jazz. I want to be really organic, improvised." So then I thought, well, maybe I just need to do what I do, just be myself, and react to things the way I would react if I'm playing in a band. So then the next thing we did is that he came over to New York. They were gonna start shooting the film, and before they started shooting, we got into a studio at Avatar Studios, now Power Station, Berklee. We got there, and we did the whole movie off of the script from beginning to end. And he would explain each scene to me in great detail, and then he would have me improvise. And I asked him, because these scenes are so long, and I want to get the timing right that you think and you're having your head, because obviously you're seeing it in your head. So can you sit in front of me, and let's imagine the scene together. I'll be improvising, and then when you see the next phase of the scene happening, just raise your hand so that I know that he opened the door, or now he's walking through the hallway according to what he had just explained to me. So we did the whole movie like that, and then he grabbed those demos and then he superimposed them on the rough cut of the film. And then they brought me to LA. They showed me what they did, and then we did everything again the next couple of days. But now looking at the film, so then obviously he had a lot of ideas of, this I really like, but I need it to be faster, more intense. When you see this, I want a big hit. This I didn't like. What else can we do? And then we were kind of workshopping in real time while looking at the film. And I got to be honest, when I saw the movie for the first time, it was the rough cut with the superimposed drum demos on top, and it didn't hit me at all. I saw it in a little TV in some studio. The sound was not great. It was not edited, so you could see like weird cuts. There was no color correction. There were no credits. The beginning of the movie was missing. So like Iñárritu played it for me, and then he came back 2 hours later and like, what do you think? I'm like, it's great, but honestly, it did not hit me at all. So I was like, oh man, this movie's kind of weird, and it just didn't, do anything for me. But then we did the whole thing in the studio, and then I went on tour with Pat. It was the Unity band, Unity group. It was a kin that tour, which was like it was 8 months out of the year, and we were in Asia, and I saw that the movie opened at the Venice Film Festival, and I started seeing reviews that the drum score and the film and the score and the score. I was like, wow, people are digging this. Amazing. It really surprised me because my expectations were kind of low because I didn't get the movie, so I didn't know if people were going to get it either. But I didn't see the finished thing. So when I came home, finally, after a few months, I went to a show at 2 p.m. in Chelsea in some movie theater just to see it, and there was nobody there almost. So it was me and Tana, my wife, who went over there. And then all of a sudden the movie starts. And the first thing I hear is my voice in Spanish that is saying something. And I'm like, what? That's my voice. And then all of a sudden I start hearing the drum hits along with the letters that start appearing. And the drum sound and, surround sound in the film theater, in the movie theater, I've never heard my drum sound like that. I've heard them a million times on CDs and stuff, but never in a movie theater. So I just started kind of like just getting chills, and I got it. I finally got it. Because I saw the whole thing, and what they did is incredible with the editing, and the whole thing was just an incredible experience, especially to be working side by side with a genius like Iñárritu, but that does something so different than I do. But at the same time, is kind of the same. Because I realized he was kind of like a jazz musician doing a movie. He was experimenting and improvising and just changing things around, and just kind of what we do in jazz. So it was just very, very inspiring to be involved with this project.
Awesome. Well, Antonio, we blew past an hour, so
it's okay. Thanks for having me. It's been a blast talking to you both.
It has been great, and I just want to throw up this comment here. Someone said Antonio was the best drummer on the Pat Metheny Group. I have to concur, and I'm not taking anything away from anybody else. I love Paul Wertigo's contribution. Still Life Talking is probably one of the most iconic. Yeah, and just awesome, really awesome.
I appreciate that.
David, thanks for coming on and bringing Antonio with you again. It's always a pleasure. Guys, please check out Birdman. I admittedly haven't seen the movie, but I will watch it. I didn't realize Michael Keaton's in it, and I'm a huge Michael Keaton fan.
You haven't seen Birdman?
I haven't seen it.
Oh my God. Hey, what the hell are you doing? You run right now and put it on.
I have to do it.
It's available for everybody. Also, everybody remember Antonio cover, third cover, Modern Drummer,
Third cover, yes.
November 2022, available online right now, moderndrummer.com, and it's great story.
And guys, I have an action item for everybody that's watching this. Go listen to Bad Ombre 2 and listen to it with the Dolby Surround Up mixer.
Yeah, Shift Bad Ombre Volume 2, because if you look it up on Apple Music or Spotify, just look for Antonio Sánchez Shift, and then it will come.
I forgot to tell you that when I go to Tidal Music, all of your albums are there except for Bad Ombre 2.
Really?
It's not categorized under your album, so you might want to talk to them about fixing that. I had to search it separately. Yeah.
Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah. Well, anyways, that's a wrap. Guys, don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to me if you want to suggest video topics or ask questions. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.